And good afternoon, my quarantine sixth grader. Happy Friday to you. Now, of course, every day probably feels like a weekend anyway, but nevertheless, it is Friday, so let's embrace it for what it is. Okay, so today, what are we going to talk about? Well, guess what, ladies? Today is your day. Today, we're going to talk about the role of women in ancient Egypt. Now, what I want you guys to keep in mind as we move forward with today's lesson and the additional videos and articles that I will post once again down there in the description portion of this video, okay? What I want you guys to keep in mind is that women in ancient Egypt actually had or were afforded many more rights than were afforded to women in ancient Mesopotamia. So that's going to be one stark difference that once again we see between Mesopotamian society and ancient Egyptian society, okay? So when we look at ancient Egypt, what you guys will notice and you'll see is that women actually held many of the same rights as men. Now, don't get it twisted. I want us to kick reality as well. Okay, the reality of the situation is that while women did or were afforded some of the same rights as men, they were not necessarily looked at as being equal within their society. Okay, women still struggled to find equality within ancient Egypt and quite often never did obtain equality in ancient Egypt. But what I want us to focus on is the fact and the idea that women were able still to exercise many of the same rights, okay, which was vastly different than Mesopotamia, where women didn't really have many rights at all. Okay, in ancient Egypt, women did have more rights. Okay, but it's important to keep in mind that while they were afforded those rights, again, they weren't looked at as being on the level playing field as men. Okay, but here's the unique thing about ancient Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, women actually not only were able to obtain some of the same rights as men, but they actually started to hold some power and even in some cases actually obtained the status and the highest the highest role in ancient Egyptian society, which was Pharaoh. Now keep that in mind. Now that's crazy if you really think about it, especially when you compare it to ancient Mesopotamia, where women had no power, okay? But here in Egypt, there were a few occasions where women were actually able to rule over the Egyptian society, over the Egyptian empire, excuse me. So that is something that is unique, all right? And it's something we should definitely not overlook, okay? Now, many of you are probably asking, Mr. Johnson, who cares? What does that have to do with today? Well, if you look at what we talk about today in our society, and when we talk about things like equal rights for women, the ability of women to lead, okay, what's often overlooked is quite often we don't look back far enough in society, or excuse me, in our history, and actually look at the fact that many of those concepts aren't exactly new. Okay, if you consider the fact that women were actually serving as pharaohs in ancient Egypt, that means that women traditionally have been able to hold power within our history. Now, granted, not as often or nearly as often as men, but nevertheless, there have been proven cases where women have actually ruled over societies, even all the way back in the ancient world. Okay, so that's something that's usually overlooked. All right, when we talk about women's rights and feminism and those types of concepts, we often don't look back far enough. Okay, because if we did, we would see that women actually held very important roles throughout societies and different civilizations throughout our history. So it's actually pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay, so again, today, like we do with every single one of our videos, you're going to go ahead and once you're done watching me, go ahead, open up the description portion of this video, and you're going to see two additional videos and two additional articles that discuss the role of women in the ancient world, or excuse me, at least in this case, ancient Egypt. Okay, so make sure you click on those links, watch the videos, and of course, read the articles. Once you're done with that, go ahead and respond to the discussion questions that I've posted in the same descriptions tab. Okay, so again, I hope everybody is doing well. I hope everybody is staying safe, and I will talk to you guys soon. Look for the next video, probably on Monday. Take care, guys.